Hopefully the sound seems to be working. Just to welcome everybody to our session here at the SDG Pavilion. Um, to those who are joining online, we're running through Zoom on my own laptop, so I apologize that the connection is not as strong as it might have been, but we're here in the middle of the Amazon, and so the infrastructure is being built all around us as we speak. But it's really a great privilege, and it's really wonderful for us to be able to be here in this SDG pavilion again, as we were back in Sharm el-Sheikh in previous COPs and also in Glasgow. I'm Ollie Henman. I'm the coordinator of Action for Sustainable Development, and together with many of the partners that you're going to hear from, we've been working over a number of years to help to bring together community-led stories of action and success. Those who are already making the change, those who are able to demonstrate how to make the change towards a more just and sustainable world. And in fact, the story, I'm just going to run through a couple of little slides of background before we come to our excellent panel to bring you up to date on the story that's brought us here. So, just as a background, I'm sure some of you will know, Action for Sustainable Development started around the negotiation of the SDGs as a campaign. Civicus was one of the key founding members, and many other NGOs at that time. And it was always aimed as a platform to bring community voices into the negotiations on the Sustainable Development Goals and on the Paris Agreement at the time. Many of us were there in Paris and in New York at that time. And that network has now grown to more than 3,500 groups around the world. If we then think about the kind of focus of the work ever since 2015, it's always been building on the great work of GCAP and the Make Poverty History campaign and all the experience. It's always been a campaign focused on grassroots mobilizing around the world, focused on bringing up the voices of those who might not otherwise be heard in spaces like this, opening that space, enabling that space, and raising up great stories of action. And particularly around September, we've always had a week of action, and you can see some examples here of different actions that have happened around the world. I know there have been incredible mobilizations, including in Kenya, in Brazil, in India, in Nepal, in Indonesia, and so many countries. But we still don't feel that that's enough. You know, bringing people together around a moment of action that can have an impact for perhaps a month or a few weeks in the press, but what happens after that? How do we maintain the momentum? How do we genuinely build the strength and the capacity of those colleagues and partners around the world? So it came when we were there together in Glasgow. Some of you will remember, there was a demand that really came from many partners to say, it's not enough just to march, we need to find a way to continue this work together. And at the time in Glasgow, there was already a challenge in terms of barriers to access. We know that it's not always easy for people to join spaces like this, and that has only continued. And even here in Belém, given the time challenges, the travel, logistics, and the cost of attending. So it's not enough to say we want people to be able to participate, but what do we do after and between COPs and in the ongoing action that we can take together? And so that's where the concept of Zovu came from. And we've then had a series of other discussions, and you'll see here there was a discussion in Nairobi last year during the Civil Society Conference that was hosted as part of the UN Summit of the Future process. So looking at the future of the UN, what does the UN do to be more decentralized, to be more responsive to community action? And through those discussions, we heard directly from many of you, many other partners. We had a very wide consultation, and the concept of Zovu has been developing through those discussions. And Esso, who some of you will know will be arriving later today, he had some delays in his flight from Togo. He was the one that proposed even the name Zovu. It comes from the language of Ewe in Togo, and it means to seek out the truth. And so we've been building this collaboration together. There's an advisory group, and you can see some of the key people here, including Esso, who I've just mentioned. Many others have been involved, many of those here in the room as well, and we really look forward to continuing the discussions. So through all those discussions, we've now got to a point where we've created a platform called Zovu. The idea is that that platform allows local groups like the Shikomenjas Committee that we're going to be able to hear from can share their own stories directly. So it's not a space that is about intermediation, it's about disintermediation, it's about enabling voices to be heard directly. People then create their own page on the website, their own initiative. They can share video content, they can share photo content, they can tell their own story directly, and it's a way to amplify and raise up those voices and bring resource directly to those initiatives. And that's where we are at this point, building that collective platform together and looking at ways that we can then strengthen that platform and bring the funding directly. And just to bring things right up to date, I was struck yesterday, I joined a session thanks to the invitation of Harrison, where we heard from indigenous leaders here in Brazil, and the top demand from those indigenous leaders was direct funding to indigenous communities. Let's get that funding, let's shift the funding away from big infrastructure and much more directly to community-led action. So that's where we are now. And now I'd like to introduce our excellent panel that you see here with me. First of all, we have Belai, who joins us from the Dayak community in Borneo, who will speak first and give her experience. And is already a very powerful activist and a very visible social media voice. Then we hear from Harrison from Cameroon, who's been on this journey together over many years and works very closely with many communities around sustainable agriculture, land use, and so on. And then we'll come first to Layani from the Shikomenjas Committee. So that's the committee in honor of Shikomenjas that now helps to manage a large area of rainforest in Acre State and works very closely with youth leadership there. And then finally we'll hear from Rajiv Joshi, who some of you will know, who has a long history in this activist space and can make some connections around where can international partners come in, what more support can we build, what kind of other partners might we want to bring into this space going forward. So thank you, and let me pass now to Belay.
Thank you so much, Ollie, and very pleased to be sharing this panel with all of the incredible activists here. My name is Belay Jandam. I come from the Dayak Ngaju and Dayak Maanyan tribe from Borneo, Indonesia. We are the first peoples of the island, and we are known globally as the forest defenders in Indonesia. I'm also here as the advocacy program coordinator for an international organization called Health in Harmony. We work with indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant peoples, and local communities across 4 continents, centering the solutions that are designed by communities to protect forests for planetary health. Shall I? Okay. I think a key part of the discussion we have today is about climate justice. So I wanted to share that as I was preparing to this discussion, I'm reminded about something that our elders in the village often say, that in the forest, nothing lives for itself. When you look at the trees, they don't keep their own fruit. When you look at the river, it doesn't drink its own water. And when you look at fire, it doesn't warm only the person who makes it. Everything that thrives in relationship. And that's how I understand the ethos of the Dayak community, Basengat Kajubata, which means to live with breath from the divine in reciprocity with all things. And when I look at the condition of the world now, I think many of the issues we face today, us being surrounded with extractivist industries and capitalist, being a priority, genocide and war and hatred, a lot of it is rooted in the lack of reciprocity, in the lack of connection with others. So for me, when we speak about climate justice, the first thing that comes to mind is climate justice is interdependence, recognizing that none of us are free until all of us are free. We have never lived in a world where our liberation is not connected, and I think a big part of our work as thank you. A big part of our work as climate justice activists is making sure that we connect the struggles and the fight of every single movement there is. And then the second point, how do we then um, what does a climate justice reality look like? For me, it means moving our center, who we put at the center of this discussion, and moving our resources exactly there. In Health and Harmony, one of the key campaigns that we are pushing for this year is Fund Climate Solutions at the Source. Working with indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant peoples, and local communities, they are the guardians of the forest, they are the experts, and they hold the solutions that protect our tropical forest. And this is a tremendous service that they provide, that my community provides, that often goes unseen and undervalued and under-resourced. And so how do we acknowledge that they are the experts here, and how do we move global resources and finance directly into the hands of communities? As of right now, less than 1% of international climate finance reaches communities directly. So we're here trying to change that. And if I may share a story from our work, when we first started, we followed a principle that we call radical listening. Radical listening really just means listening to communities with recognition that they are the experts. And I want to highlight 4 values that underpin this process of radical listening. The first one is interbeing. Interbeing is a value that was advocated by Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Vietnamese Buddhist monk and also peace activist. And he says that all things are one, in a way that different organs of our body is one. So, for example, if our foot lost circulation, our heart would not withhold blood and wait for payment. It would send blood because it realizes that the foot and the heart is 2 organs of the same body. And if we try to understand this idea of interbeing in a global scale, it also means that when a community and their rainforest on the other side of the world is not thriving, then our communities in the city or in the country in the global north will also not be thriving as well. The second principle is reciprocity. So how do we work with communities but seeing them not as beneficiaries of aid but benefactors? Recognizing that any and all resources that we provide is compensation and reciprocal to the type of value that they share for this world. The third one is anti-colonialism. It's a core part of our work because many of the communities we work with have been extracted under a colonial paradigm for many, many years. So any of the work and resource transfer that we do really is just a repatriation of wealth. And then finally, humility. I think this is a key part because many of us from the global north or trained in the sciences or academia is often labeled as the answer givers and the experts. But in the case of climate justice, we need to recognize that the experts are the communities who live and breathe the forest and nature every single day. So how do we build that humility within the world to understand that there is a dynamic we need to shift? And after doing many years of radical listening, the solutions that have come up from communities is incredible. What makes it radical is that we do what we are told. We get solutions from the communities and direct finance straight into that. And while that shouldn't be radical, it very often is. And so some examples I can give is with our work in Indonesia, deforestation, as the communities determine, is actually driven by a lack of access to healthcare. So many of the communities there are not able to pay for their medical bills, and so their last resort is to cut forest or deforest in order to be able to afford going to the hospital or paying for their children's medication. That's not an option that anybody should live with. But if we haven't radically listened to communities, we wouldn't know that one of the solutions to protect the forest actually starts with health. And so in Indonesia, following that process, we built with the community a health clinic, a health center that not only provides affordable, high-quality healthcare, but also has non-cash payment options where communities can pay with seedlings or handicrafts or rice husks, and there is a tiered discount system so that they can get lower prices for healthcare when their community or their village protects more forests and there is less deforestation there. It's different with Brazil, for example, where the solutions from the radical listening process was to create to use technology to aid with forest territory monitoring. So using a GIS supported patrolling system so that communities are able to monitor whether land invaders are there in their area and respond urgently. And it's different as well when we work with communities in Madagascar, where the solutions that we invest in and that is determined by the communities are more towards intensive rice farming training, because they want to be able to produce more rice in less land, which not only helps their health but also reduces the pressure on the forest. So these are solutions that I think no, scientist or experts could find unless they listen to the communities who live there. And I think that's what real climate justice is. And I will close by referencing as well to the protests that perhaps many of us have heard or even seen that happened last night in the Blue Zone that was led by indigenous communities and grassroots movements. I think that speaks more volume about climate justice than anything a company CEO or a world leader or a global institution can ever say. We're taking up space in a conference that has systematically excluded our solutions for many, many years. If that is not climate justice, then I don't know what is.
Thank you so much, Belay. Really powerful words and really speaking to the truth of what we're facing. Thank you. And we'll have time to come back again to each of the panelists as well. But now if we can come to Harrison, maybe to set the scene from the point of view of another great rainforest basin of the Congo Basin and the way that work happens in Cameroon with community solutions. Over to you, Harrison.
Yeah, thank you very much, Oli. Like she rightly said, radical thinking and taking this radical thinking that leads to informed decision making. It's actually very important because we, from the perspective of Africa, and just to say, we have done some work, especially in Indonesia, like you heard yesterday, with some of my partners in the US. We've done mapping of industrial threats in Indonesia and like and other parts of the Amazon and in Brazil and in Cameroon. And what are we looking at? It's not just the radical thinking, but looking at how the indigenous people and local communities take ownership of most of these processes, where we don't just live with them, but we understand them. And they don't just listen from us, but we work and live with them for them to understand and for us to understand them. That's why we are moving away from the aspect of sensitizing communities to dialogue. You need to dialogue with communities, people. And that's within this framework that we now work with communities to conduct intensive participatory mapping. Because one of the problems we've had, like she talked about science, with the discussions we have in the academia and the rest, it's different from the traditional knowledge and practices in the communities. And that is why with all the technology, the GIS, we accompany communities, work with them to conduct detailed community participatory mapping and land use planning, because they tend to understand better what they have and they document it, because we are gradually phasing away with those ancestral practices or those elderly persons who actually hold customs and tradition. But customs and tradition are key elements in the protection of nature and in all these climate discussions. Because no matter what we discuss in terms of climate, no matter we're talking about loss and damages, we're talking about deforestation, but if we don't capitalize and make use of customs and tradition, indigenous knowledge, we will just be moving around the circle and doing business as usual. And reason why, with this participatory mapping, the communities are now documenting their history, their tradition, their practices that are climate friendly. Today, academically, we're using words like climate smart agriculture, but the community people have been doing climate smart. We're just using terminologies to brandish what they have been practicing. But now, how do we get the communities into science, blending technology and traditional knowledge? That's why we are one of those blending this aspect of climate. You cannot isolate climate discussions from the biodiversity conservation. And hence why our approaches is more towards decolonizing all these practices, decolonizing and pulling down fortress protection, where communities were only informed of developmental projects. Communities are now, we're making sure that we train them, that we understand them, and they are part of decision making. Part of decision making, for example, in protected area management, in climate discussions. So they don't just participate, but their needs, their interest is taken into account. Hence why, where we are doing developmental projects, support community-led, like in protected area management, in climate smart practices, they lead the process. We are just facilitators. We are not a replacement. So in this process, you find communities, they document their traditional practices, what we call sustainable agriculture, sustainable or smart agricultural practices. They have their traditional ways that they have been doing it. And we came to discover that with our science and technology, their practices are more sustainable than because it's science and technology that introduced fertilizers. In those days, there were no fertilizers, and they were producing more bioproducts, which we need today. Now, and there was little deforestation, but industrialization came and destroyed all of that. Now, how do we rebuild all of this? We need to rebuild this through building on traditional knowledge, bringing science for us to understand and also document. Because without data, we cannot take informed decisions. So for communities to take informed decisions, they need to understand also what is happening in their territory. We will say they understand, but there is divergence information, there is a lot of misinformation that we need to create a platform at community level where this data is understood by the present generation and the unborn generation. Because if we don't document it, most of this data is being eroded. Most of this information, the elderly in the next 50 years, only you and I will not be there. If at all we are there, we will not be very active. But the young generation need to meet this data documented somewhere that they can use to take informed decisions. Same with their practices. How do they live? Because in all of this discussion, like she said, if we are not putting food or adding income into the pockets of the community people, we will just be singing praises and coming to our normal international discourse and go back with papers and agreements and pledges, and the communities people keep eroding the biodiversity. But they are the protectors of our nature. And for them to continuously protect it, we should invest on the community people. The global north should invest, and we should stop giving loans to developing countries. We should invest. Community we come and give loans, where we give loans and almost more than half of that loan gets back to those who gave the loan. So we are instead impoverishing the countries. So we should look at how these loans, like we're discussed about TFFF. Yesterday in the Congo Basin, they launched a pledge for the Congo Basin Fund. Now, all of this is on paper. How much, like she talked about, less than 1% goes to the community. We need to put down transparent and accountability systems where a, a dollar that goes to the community should be accounted for, not only by the people, the community people, but also the people who send the money. Because in most cases, we talk about 10 billion and not up to that 10 billion goes to the community. So we need to put down stringent accountability systems where the community people are equally informed. Not that we come to conferences and we talk about billions when the community people did not see it. And that is why we are working also with the government to work on to improve on the policy. Unfortunately, most of the policies in the developing countries are still colonialized. They still have colonialistic tendencies. So we need to reformulate and review most of our policy documents such that communities' voices are in it. Like, I'm a forester, and we recently reviewed our national forestry law, where I was part of it. And within it, you see how community actions are capitalized, are captured in that forestry law. And so those are actually some of the things we need to do. Look at policy changes, look at investment opportunities, and also building capacities both at international and at community level, wherein the local people, the community people, the young people growing up should start understanding science and technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Harrison. Thank you so much. And you really, again, brought some very, very clear articulation of the changes that we need in terms of the systemic changes, bringing resource much more directly to communities. And next, I'm personally incredibly excited that we have the group representing Chico Mendes Committee. I spent time with the Chico Mendes Committee 20 years ago in Acre, and there's an amazing reserve there that has been established in the name of the powerful rubber tapper and environmental leader Chico Mendes from the 80s. And that reserve in Chapuri has fantastic work with young people in the community. And so Layani is one of the leaders of that group, and it's wonderful to see you again, Layani. So perhaps you can explain, how has it worked for you, and what are some of your recommendations on how to strengthen community action?
Bom dia, tá me ouvindo bem, né? A gente, na verdade, eu fiquei muito feliz com a fala do Harrison e da Bali, porque uma das coisas que a gente sempre fala é que a formação, ela é a base de tudo, né? Para a gente conseguir mudar uma sociedade através da formação e da educação. Tá. Eu achei que ele estava fazendo. Então, vamos iniciar.
Então, eu vou começar, aí você fala, depois eu falo. So, good morning. So, she said, I'm very happy to listen to what you said, because I really believe that everything begins with education and investment in the capacity building and the strengthening of the local communities.
E que realmente o que vai fazer a mudança nas comunidades, além da formação e da educação, é o financiamento direto, né, para a própria comunidade, com organizações que sejam realmente sérias. Por exemplo, a gente tem o Comitê Chico Mendes, tem o CNS, que é o Conselho Nacional das Populações Tradicionais, e essas organizações trabalham diretamente com a gente, né. Tem coisas que a gente não consegue enxergar por estar dentro da comunidade, estar dentro do problema, só que pessoas que são do nosso convívio, que são também comunitários, que saíram para fora, que têm um conhecimento mais macro da situação, conseguem trazer para a gente uma formação mais...
So one of the things, besides education and the capacity building and all those processes that are so important, is to have real investment directly to the communities. And sometimes all this process comes from having partners and local partners that are building together, coming from the territories, but has more access to knowledge or access to public policies, but they are from the territory as well. So the ecosystem of local organizations can really support the raising voices that are coming from new movements. And this process, a longer process, is so important to be always keep on going, keep on growing.
Hoje, o Comitê Chico Mendes faz um trabalho muito importante com os jovens comunitários, que é dar voz para esses jovens e apontar para eles os espaços de debates e abrir espaço nesses locais de debates. Então, a gente trabalha diretamente com os jovens das comunidades. Eu trabalho diretamente com jovens da comunidade. Através do trabalho do comitê, a gente criou um coletivo de jovens extrativistas, que é o Coletivo Varadouro, que tem na sua essência, que é organizar essa juventude e mostrar para ela qual o caminho de debate, qual o caminho de luta.
So one of the examples of how this comes to the ground is that the Chico Mendes Committee support the youth movements, and then based on the strengthening of the leaderships of these youth movements, now we have the Varadouro Collective. This is a local movement of youth leaderships. Liane is one of them, and they are building together with all the whole community led by youth, the local solutions and raising their voices in spaces like here.
E para isso, o coletivo e o comitê fazem esse trabalho de criar essa consciência crítica. Porque, por exemplo, agora tem o Fundo Floresta, que são 20%. Mas, às vezes, a gente ouve falar de 20% do Fundo Floresta e a gente não tem noção do mínimo que é isso. Mas, se você tem uma consciência crítica, se você sabe das suas necessidades, a gente entende que 20% não é suficiente para financiar comunidades tradicionais, né? E também, hoje em dia, a gente fala muito de... Já vou parar, tá? A gente fala muito dos nossos companheiros, quilombolas, indígenas, ribeirinhos, e os extrativistas são esquecidos, porque extrativista geralmente denota algo que é negativo, mas para a gente não. Extrativista ou extrativismo é da nossa natureza, de onde a gente vive, né? Nós vivemos no território de modo extrativista, cuidando e preservando a floresta, e isso não é reconhecido.
So there is a huge challenge of... Você começou falando
Do Fundo da Floresta.
So for another example is that when we have and we listen about the funding for the local communities initiatives, now we are listening deeply also about the TFF launch, and we have heard about the 20% of the funds are going to be invested immediately to the communities. Why not the inverse? Why not 80% for the communities and not just 20%? So those challenges should be based in the participation, the direct participation, like you said, of the local voice in the local communities in those processes. Another example of our challenges is that most of all, there is a diversity of representations of local communities. We talk a lot about Afro-descendants, local traditional communities, about indigenous peoples, but the peoples of the forests, this, what we call in Brazil, the extractivistas. Here in Brazil are the peoples of the forest that live inside the forest, not necessarily they are living there for a long time, but they are also part of the solution. Sometimes the public policies forget about them. So for the youth movement, it's so important to say we are also here, we are also leading. So the diversity of traditional local communities should be included in all the public policies in each one of the countries.
Então, a juventude, ela faz parte dessa solução, né? A juventude extrativista do norte amazônico faz parte dessa solução para que a gente possa conseguir combater essa mudança climática que já está aí, não tem mais como a gente negar ela. Então, a gente traz a juventude e mostra para a juventude que é com ela, que é hoje, que é o presente, que é com o trabalho que a juventude faz, que as comunidades têm um pouco de dificuldade de trabalhar com comunicação, mas a juventude não, a juventude é mais fácil para fazer comunicação, para mostrar para o mundo o trabalho que fazem, a vida que a gente está tendo. A gente teve um problema na Reserva Chico Mendes esse ano, onde teve muita pressão, a Reserva Chico Mendes vem sofrendo muita pressão do agronegócio, da pecuária extensiva, E quem está combatendo isso nas redes sociais, as fake news que são feitas, é a juventude, porque tem mais acesso e sabe lidar melhor com a comunicação. Então, isso também é uma forma de solução e de combate.
Another example that is really really striking the structure of the forest is that the local movement led by youth are the ones that are fighting disinformation inside the local communities. We have a huge area impacted by deforestation, by cattle production, by agribusiness, and local communities many times doesn't have the information, or the good information about what does it mean to them. So now it is Varadouro collectively, the youth movement in his communities, who are stand up their voices in social media, in campaigns, talking to the elders, talking to the local community, saying this is not a sustainable development for us. We should fight this kind of development and fight this information inside. So communication led by youth from the territory to change mindsets and sometimes the legacy of colonization that are impacting our territories, our local communities.
A gente fez esse documento, que é uma recomendação de políticas públicas das necessidades das populações extrativistas. E o básico é a necessidade básica, ainda é necessidade, como saúde, educação, acessibilidade. Então, a gente entende que 20% de um fundo florestal para uma população que está defendendo uma floresta que ainda necessita do básico não é solução. Né? É um problema, na verdade. Problematiza, porque você ouve falar de um financiamento que nunca vai chegar na gente. Né? Quando a gente ouve falar, precisa proteger, tem que fazer desmatamento zero, mas a gente não tem o básico para viver, porque a gente ainda está brigando por saúde, por educação, por escolas, por ramais acessíveis, para que mulheres tenham direito a ter a sua saúde garantida, seja do parto, seja a vacina das crianças que não chega. E aí vem falar de 20% para a gente, como se isso fosse a solução dos problemas para uma coisa que nem chega. A gente visita comunidades, enquanto CNS, Comitê, Varadouro, a gente está em trabalho com comunidades que ainda lutam pela fome, com a fome, que ainda tenta combater a fome, que a alimentação do dia, às vezes, é peixe e farinha. E aí você vai chegar para uma comunidade dessa e vai falar de desmatamento zero, vai falar que o que o governo destinou é 20%, vai falar que a gente nem existe no mapa, que os extrativistas nem são reconhecidos como um povo. E isso a gente só vai combater através da educação, e é por isso que esse trabalho que o comitê faz, né, que é uma das soluções que a gente acha, é formar e organizar a juventude através de formações de consciência de classe, porque a gente sabe que a gente só consegue enxergar para onde a gente vai a partir do momento que a gente sabe quem é a gente, né? Que nós somos territórios, que o território não é algo abstrato, porque somos nós somos pessoas que estamos lá cuidando e preservando todos os dias. E aí, no final, eu quero ler a carta do Chico.
So sorry. So I wish you could understand Portuguese really deeply. I will try to translate what Laiana just said. So first of all, she agrees deeply with you both on how important it is to have the knowledge from the territory in documents, listened. And so this document is a research that was done by the youth, Varadouro collectively. They listen in all the communities in his communities, and all their wishes, all their thoughts are here. And the reality is, like you said, there is no sanitation, there is no water, there is no food. Sometimes they are striving with basic things. If the people on the territories are suffering with basic things, what should we do when we say, oh, you have to stop deforestation, but they don't have the basic? If we come with a campaign with very intangible benefits, they want the basic. So one part of those voices was collected in this document, and this is the role of the youth movement now in his action commands, is really working with education, combating disinformation with the local communities, and really trying to make the best process to defend the rights to the fundings. So if we have 20% of a global fund for forests, we should have more funds going directly to the communities and not the other side. And then Laiane would like to read a letter from Chico Mendes for the youth of Brazil and the world.
Eu vou ler uma carta que o Chico Mendes deixou para as juventudes, né? Porque ele já entendia que o futuro, a solução seria os jovens que seriam os protagonistas. Porque quando Chico começou no ativismo ambiental, ele também era um jovem, né? Um jovem seringueiro que entendeu a necessidade da organização dos extrativistas. Então, em um dia, pensando, ele resolveu fazer essa carta. Não ia ser de conhecimento, porque ele tinha jogado fora, mas um amigo dele, Gumercindo, achou a carta e guardou. Não, e tu... tu só explica para eles o que eu falei.
So the letter is a letter of Chico Mendes, and this was a letter that was not supposed to be found. He had in his, but after he was killed, this is a letter that Chico Mendes wrote a few weeks before he was killed in Chapuriacre in Brazil, and his dear friend Gumercindo found the letter, and this is a letter for the youth of the world.
Atenção, jovens do futuro. 6 de setembro do ano de 1120, aniversário ou primeiro centenário da Revolução Socialista Mundial.
Attention, attention, youth of the future. September the 6th of the year of 2120. Anniversary of the first centenary of the global socialist revolution.
Que unificou todos os povos do planeta num único ideal e num só pensamento de unidade socialista, e que pôs fim a tudo os criminalistas.
This revolution that unified all the peoples of the planet in one single ideal and in one thought of socialist unity, and that put an end in all enemies of the new society.
Aqui ficam somente a lembrança de um triste passado de dor, sofrimento e morte. Desculpe, eu estava sonhando quando escrevi esta carta, estes acontecimentos, que eu mesmo não verei, mas tenho o prazer de ter sonhado.
Here is just a memory of a sad past of pain, suffering, and death. Sorry, I was dreaming when I wrote these accomplishments that I, myself, will not see, but I have the pleasure of having dreamed it.
Então, Chico Mendes, quando ele escreveu essa carta, ele já estava pensando nisso, né? Nessa nova sociedade. E nos deixou o compromisso da juventude de criar essa nova sociedade. Só que aqui ele estava brigando apenas com a questão do capitalismo. E hoje a gente tem as mudanças climáticas, né? A gente briga com o clima, com as grandes indústrias que querem nos matar todos os dias. E o legado do Chico é esse, ao qual a gente quer levar para frente, e a gente vê essa carta como uma solução de mobilização de juventude, para que a gente possa ter um resultado bom, que daqui mais 100 anos essa carta ainda seja lida, mas que nós também, que estamos lutando hoje, que os povos extrativistas também sejam reconhecidos como grandes idealistas e protagonistas dessa mudança, e que a justiça, não existe justiça social sem reconhecimento dos povos que estão na floresta, e não pode dizer povos, tem que especificar esses povos. São indígenas, são ribeirinhas, são extrativistas, são quilombolas, cada um tem um protagonismo, cada um tem uma ação que faz, e todos têm que ser nomeados. É isso.
This letter was a message from Chico Mendes for the future, and Chico Mendes once was a youth leadership fighting against capitalism, and later, and now today we are fighting climate change, the climate crisis. But this legacy of Chico Mendes, of empowering youth for this new world that we wanted to bring together, is something that we care deeply in our hearts in the social movements in His Chico Mendes, and we say it. We have to recognize all the traditional populations. We have to name it, to recognize, to really say by name who are the local communities one by one.
I just want to thank Ollie Henman and the Action for Sustainable Development movement, which has been with us for many years, and for the speakers, for Belai and for Harrison and Latinia. I really am grateful for what each of you have said, which to me has reminded me of different parts of my own journey in life. I began as a young activist leader. I think all of us have a moment in our lives where something has happened and we've realized that not only are we powerless, but in fact, what we should be more afraid of is that we are powerful beyond measure. And that when we find ways of tapping in to our own power, not just as individuals, but our collective power as we participate with each other, that we actually have the capacity to transform many, many, many systems, whether it's a food system or a school where you're trying to transform the meals that you receive, or whether it's the education budget in India, where in the global call to action against poverty, which was launched in 20 years ago in Porto Alegre at the World Social Forum, where President Lula announced the global call to action against poverty with President Mandela in Trafalgar Square. And in India it was called Varana Toro Abhiyan, which means Keep Your Promise campaign, where they were able to get the government to increase education, which I agree is absolutely a critical part of the solution. We have the power, and the power to create this transition is, for me, the key is participation. And I think each of the speakers have spoken a little bit about how participation has unlocked new opportunities. And I think we're living in a moment where we may have forgotten the power of people against the very system that has imprisoned us. And whether we're fighting against poverty, against climate change, against other systems of oppression, we need to find new ways of organizing that connect our struggles. I think the vision of Chico Mendes of a new world that we can build, I too believe that it is time for some kind of revolution, that we have to go from an extractive system, one that has not been in sacred reciprocity, as my dear sister has said, to one which is grounded and rooted in the model that we are daily in awe of, the divine Mother Nature, which exists as a regenerative system. And as we make that just transition from an extractive system which has left so many people behind, which has left so many wounds, which has traumatized many of us who have been moved from different regions of the world, from India to Africa, whether it's here in Latin America, colonization. Colonization has not just affected the colonized. As you say, our liberation is caught up in the liberation of others. And the process of the just transition, it's not just about financing, and financing is critical. That's why we're here, to ensure that there is a just transition fund that is supporting countries and economies on a journey where they phase out fossil fuels, and that there is resource going to local communities where we're flying in diesel and where we could be providing solar for education and so many other purposes in healthcare. But that as we make that transition, it's not just about finance. The just transition agenda is equally an agenda that is about social and a spiritual process that we as a civilization have to go through to let go of the old world in order to welcome this new world. And we have to acknowledge in this process of just transition, in this growing movement from climate justice, not just the largest climate justice march that happened in my home country of Scotland when we hosted COP26 in Glasgow, but also the thousands of people that were marching yesterday because they want to participate. We have to find new ways of enabling people to participate. We should not be afraid of participation. Participation is the key to democracy, to creating wealth, to cooperation, to what enables us not just to focus on the top of the pyramid, but to distribute resources at the base of the pyramid. And as an economist, we know that when you focus the wealth only on a few, that the marginal likelihood of that few to create more economic activity is very limited. But when you distribute that wealth and more people have the opportunity to participate in the economy, everyone's spirits, everyone's livelihoods can be lifted up. And so in an economy, and many economies, India, Brazil, and others, where we're seeing skyrocketing inequality, we have to recognize that if we want to address climate change, we cannot address it without dealing with inequality. And if we want to address inequality, we cannot do it without addressing the deep economic root causes that we have of a system that is inherently unjust, that disperses resources to the few at the cost of the many, where our tax systems are inefficient, where our trade systems are inefficient, where smallholder farmers are being hit the hardest by those that are subsidizing grains in economies which are producing one commodity, and where people are getting sick and where we have mental illness. I live in New York and I drink sometimes a can of soda which is made from high fructose corn syrup. Tastes terrible. I don't want my 4-year-old to drink it. But this is not the future that we want. There is a new world that we can imagine. Regenerative solutions, whether it's from farming and understanding how do we organize our crops using our ancestral wisdom. You know, in India, the way that we produce food is now a basis for the innovation of some of the world's most innovative food companies. This is not about looking into the future. This is also about gazing deeply within and into our past, honoring the wisdom of our ancestors, honoring the power of an intergenerational process, and acknowledging that the new circles of wisdom that will guide us into this future can be forged here in the present. We often say that young people are leaders of tomorrow. Tomorrow is always approaching, but never quite comes. That's why we have to create space to acknowledge that young people, old people, middle-aged people, brown people, white people, many kinds of people, we are all leaders of today. And that means we got to create new tables to put activists and artists, business leaders, entrepreneurs, spiritual leaders, and many, many others together to try to forge a just transition. And I'm very delighted that this space has created just the beginning of a conversation about how we might do that, and that Zovu as a platform is demonstrating that there are new and innovative ways to get resources directly to those who are demonstrating what that transition looks like. And thank you to Ollie and the team for inviting us to be here.
Thank you, Rajiv, and thank you so much to all of our amazing speakers. I think just on that last point, coming from Layani and also Rajiv, remembering the call for, you know, un otro mundo es posible in Porto Alegre in 2005. Another world is possible, and that vision that we heard about from Chico Mendes, it's really in our collective creation that we build that other world, that new reality, that new way of interacting together. And I think, as you say, this panel hopefully serves one small step along that journey, and it's really been so powerful to be able to connect the rainforest stories from Indonesia, from the Congo Basin, from the Amazon, to be able to share this moment together. And we hope that we can continue to work with you and with many other colleagues. And we will have some further steps in the Zovu journey. So some of you will have already seen on the website, I'm seeing if I can get it up here. So the website does now have a way that groups can share their stories directly, and we'll be expanding that further. And for those who might have an idea that they want to share right now, we do have some small action grants available to build some more pages and initiatives on the site. At this stage, it's only a $500 grant each time. It's a small amount, but at least it's a start, and we hope to be able to bring more funds through this platform going forward. So if you have an idea, if you have an initiative, and those joining also online, this is open at the moment, and we'd love to feature more initiatives on the website. I also want to apologize to everyone who is on Zoom. I know that the connection has not been too easy, but this session is being recorded professionally here by the team at the SDG Pavilion, so we hope that we'll have a recording afterwards that we can also share. So thank you once more to our excellent panel, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.